You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to Soul Talk with Rabbi David Aaron. This is a show where you'll get real answers to the most complex questions of being alive. I'm your host, Leorah Mandel, and I want to welcome you to our first show. Now you may be wondering what to expect. Well, with this first show, we're going to introduce you to Rabbi David Aaron himself. You may be wondering, who is Rabbi Aaron, and how did he come to exploring life's big questions? Well, stay tuned after these messages, and you will get to hear from Rabbi Aaron himself. He started out as a regular kid, you could say just like any of us. Except he had something unusual about his family background, especially unusual for today. He was the son of a Holocaust survivor, and just that fact, living with that reality, knowing the bits and pieces that he knew of what his mother had gone through, hearing her scream at night, started at a very young age to brew questions in his mind. What's this world all about? Why do bad things happen to good people? Is there really a God? If there is a God, why can such horrible things happen, like happened in the Holocaust that happened to his own mother? Now, some of you may have had similar questions over time. Sometimes we address these questions, and sometimes we run away from them because they're just too painful and too big. And that's what Rabbi David Aaron did at first. But join us as we hear how Rabbi Aaron finally confronted these questions, how he realized that you can't run away from the big questions of life, you just have to deal with them. You have to face them, and you have to grow with them. We live in a time with distractions. There's so many things to distract us from what's really important in life. There's so many distractions that keep us away from our own thoughts. A little bit of quiet. We have phones, we have computers, we have music, everything's at our fingertips. And it makes it very easy to run away from actually thinking about life, thinking about real big issues in life. And yet these are issues that are at the core of our very existence. Understanding why we're here, what we're supposed to be doing here, how to achieve a sense of happiness, a sense of purpose. These are questions that ultimately really define the quality of the life that we live. Our understanding of them really affects the way we live our life. So join us each week as Rabbi David Aaron and I will explore life's big questions here on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Ira Michelson, and along with my co-host Rod Bryant, we're excited to be relaunching Beyond the Matrix on Israel News Talk Radio. Many of you have already taken the red pill, and you will listen in because you made the decision to unplug and join the real world. One has to be willing and able to let go of one's illusions and all that they have become familiar with in order to see reality. Remember, all we are offering is the truth, nothing more. Every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at 6 p.m. Israel time and 11 a.m. Eastern time for Beyond the Matrix with Ira Michelson and Rod Bryant. Bringing you cutting-edge talk radio with interesting and relevant guests covering current events that affect Israel and the rest of the world. So tune in each week as you won't want to miss Beyond the Matrix or any of the other amazing shows bringing you straight talk from Israel on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to Soul Talk with Rabbi David Aaron. I'm your host, Leorah Mandel, and I want to welcome you to our first show. I hope that you'll join us each week as we have a great lineup of shows that will explore real answers to the big questions of life. Some of you may be familiar with Rabbi Aaron, and others of you may be wondering, who is Rabbi David Aaron? What's his story? And how has he come to explore and understand life's big questions? For our first show, I want to give you, our listeners, an opportunity to get to know Rabbi Aaron and hear about his personal journey. I'm going to start by sharing with you a short biography of Rabbi Aaron, and then I will bring him in so he can share his story himself. Rabbi Aaron is a spiritual visionary and master educator who has invested over 4 decades delving into life's biggest question marks and sharing Torah's ancient wisdom for living the best life. Rabbi Aaron dares to ask and answer the most difficult questions that people struggle with about God's existence and their own. His mature, sophisticated, and holistic understanding of Torah offers life-changing clarity about ourselves and our purpose on earth. The son of a Holocaust survivor, Rabbi Aaron has struggled since a very early age to understand the world's potential for hatred and paradoxical yearning for meaning, love, and creativity. His own spiritual journey led him to Israel, where he studied Torah and Jewish mysticism under the tutelage of the great masters, including Hagaon Rav Shlomo Fisher Shlita. He is the founder and dean of Israelite and the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Oraita. Rabbi Aaron is the author of 8 paradigm-shifting books and the rabbi-in-residence of Israel News Talk Radio's Soul Talk. Rabbi Aaron, I want to welcome you to our first show, Soul Talk with Rabbi David Aaron. And if you would, I would like you to share with our listeners how you yourself came to examining life's big
Leorah,
questions.
And hello to all our listeners. Very excited about launching the show, and I'm looking forward to getting your questions, by the way. So should be just a dialogue between myself and Leorah, but we're hoping as the shows evolve, we'll have a chance to dialogue with all of you. So I guess a little bit about myself. I think if I had to sum it up, it goes back to memory, a moment. I was a little boy, and I woke up startled to my mother screaming in the middle of the night. My mother was a survivor of the Holocaust. But, there's all kinds of survivors. There's some that talk, and there's some that really don't talk. My mother was the non-talker. So, maybe there's an advantage there. Some children of survivors tell me that I'm actually lucky. But it's not an easy situation to be in. And so I was left to my fantasies of what were the horrors that happened to my mother. I knew that my Bubi and Zaidi, my grandfather, my grandmother were murdered by the Nazis. I knew that my uncle was murdered by the Nazis. I knew somehow that my mother had gone through something torturous as a young child, actually age 15, but I didn't know more than that. So one night I woke up hearing my mother screaming in the middle of her sleep. My father quickly quietened her down and calmed her down. But that night I recall I lay there and my mind was flooded with questions. I was a little boy, but I was so full of questions. And questions like, what's life really all about? What's the point of all this? Is there a God? And if there's a God, is he really good? And if he's good, why is the world so bad? And if we're the chosen people, I wish he chose somebody else. And that was really what I struggled with. And
So you're saying these questions actually came to you at a very young age,
exactly.
And a lot of it was brought about through life circumstances.
At a very young age, I was struggling, really struggling. And my first response to these questions is to run away from them, because I was too young. I didn't know what to do with it. And it's not like I did go to Hebrew school, but the Hebrew school didn't really deal with any of that. And I went to secular school, and none of that was happening there too. And so, really, I didn't know what to do with all these questions. So what I decided to do is to run away. And I found 2 ways to run away from my questions. One was rock and roll, and the other one was comedy. Rock and roll was basically, I got myself a stereo system, and I would literally hard rock myself to sleep at night. Because every night I would start getting haunted by these questions. And so whenever there was a quiet moment, especially when you're about to go to sleep and there you are in bed remembering this kind of traumatic moment, I had all these questions and I couldn't deal with these questions because I didn't know where to look for the answers. So essentially, I just kept turning the music up. In fact, one of my favorite albums said, for best results, play at full blast. And it's true. I got the best results. I just kept turning up the music and running to rock concerts. And then my other escape valve was comedy. My father, who was not a survivor, but he was a Russian immigrant, he really loved comedy, and he was especially loved this comedian that was probably very famous in the Catskills and hotels. I'd never heard of him, but he was a psychologist comedian. He used to use his comedy as a way to kind of share psychological advice. And so I happened to hear one of his skits, his routines, and he said that it's known that people who laugh never get an ulcer. And when I heard that, that made a lot of sense. I started to think that that's a philosophy of life. Just keep laughing. And so I decided that I'd keep laughing and I'd keep everybody else laughing around me. And, so, and I didn't get an ulcer. I got a hernia. I'm just joking. But,
So music and comedy are often used as a spice to life, something to add to your life. But in your sense, you're saying it was really about something that helps
loud
you run
music,
away.
loud laughter. I decided that I just fill my life with laughter and music and not have to deal with my soul, not have to deal with these questions, not allow myself those quiet, contemplative moments. Unfortunately, now that I'm a Rosh Yeshiva of a yeshiva for actually high school graduates, I'm seeing that this generation is even more challenged than mine, or actually more capable of running away from themselves than I was, because they have their iPhone. I'd have to go to my room, turn on my stereo, or go to the television, and maybe there's comedy, maybe there isn't. But this generation has distraction at their fingers and have the capacity to successfully be comfortably numb as much as they want. And so I'm finding it's very hard for people to have those contemplative moments, those opportunities for introspection, where you really have to deal with the questions.
So you started out by running away. At what point in that process did you realize that running away was not making your questions go away? They were still with you and you needed to find something better?
Well, I actually didn't realize that. Somebody who knew me suggested that I go to this program called Torah High. I didn't know what that sounded. That sounded like some drug. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, there's this organization called NCSY, and they host these weekly events for high school students at a synagogue, and a lot of guys and girls. It's fun. There's some interesting discussion. So I went because I was looking to meet the girls.
That's understandable.
I wasn't really interested in introspection or contemplation. I actually very much not interested in that. But I was interested in a better social life. So I went there. And I saw the list of talks, and one of them was introspection. I knew I shouldn't go to this one. But something inside me said, you really should. And so I went. And more than the content, the presenter shocked me, because he was a fellow who was very funny, really very kind of cool kind of a guy, and he was wearing a kippah, and he had a tzitzit sticking out of his pants, and he was very alive and happy and dynamic, and he was just a with it kind of guy. And what really disturbed me is he was really happy being Jewish. And I was very unhappy being Jewish. I really didn't feel so great about being chosen for all this pain of history. But he was a man who really was happy about being Jewish. So I went back the week after, and then the week after. And then they told me that they're hosting a Shabbaton in a little city outside of Toronto, where I'm from. I think it was called Oshawa. And so I remember it was Friday afternoon, and they did this lighting ceremony, and they had like hundreds of kids about to light candles, holding matches in their hands, and we were all singing and dancing and preparing to light these candles. And then suddenly I said to myself, I've never done this before, but this feels really familiar. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And then it hit me. You see, I loved rock and roll, and I went to a lot of rock concerts. My favorite moment in the rock concert was when thousands of people in the music hall would light a match. And I remember the first time I saw this, I was like, wow, I need a match. Excuse me, can I borrow a match? Can I have a match? And there I was holding my match, feeling, I don't know, something very special happened at those rock concerts.
Stay tuned as we continue to hear more about this story from Rabbi David Aaron when we return.
Shalom, I'm Judith Bergman. Join me every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Israel time and 10 a.m. New York Eastern time for the Real Israel Talk Show with Judith Bergman, online at Israel News Talk Radio. From the heart of Israel, I bring you all the latest about what's happening here in Israel behind the headlines, exciting guests, and those only in Israel moments. So join me every Wednesday right here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Soul Talk with Rabbi David Aaron. Rabbi Aaron was in the middle of sharing a story where he was at a Shabbaton and they were lighting some lights. And strangely enough, that experience reminded him of no other than rock concerts. Our story continues with Rabbi David Aaron.
See, my favorite moment in the rock concerts was when thousands of people were sitting there in the concert hall and would hold a match. Now, I know today people hold their cell phones, but that's a desecration of rock and roll. I'm an ultra rocker, and I realized that this is so much the same. You know, the first time I saw this blew me away at the rock concert.
So in a sense, what you're saying is the very thing that you started running away from, you used rock to run away from their big questions. The lights there, in a way, now the lights at this new event and this new opportunity were the beginning of you realizing there might be a place that instead of running away from my questions, I can actually have them answered.
Well, I didn't really think in terms of questions and answers. I started feeling more, and I had this sense of an experience. Now when I look back at it, I realize that what I was yearning for was a connection to a higher power. I was looking for God. And that at that rock concert, that sense of that shared self, that we were all rocking together, that we were all little matches contributing to one great fire. And so that day at that Shabbaton, I started to realize that what I was looking for at those rock concerts was Shabbat, God, a feeling of connectivity to a greater reality. And that was a big transformational turning point in my life.
So where did you go from there? What happened after you started going to the Shabbaton? You started going to classes. How did your journey continue?
I started realizing that there's actually answers to these questions, which I had given up on. And that was really quite a life-changing experience to start getting clarity in my life. And I started feeling happier, even though I thought I was happy because I was rocking and laughing. But, you can rock and laugh, but inside you're actually a little bit crying because you really don't know who you are. You don't know why you are. You don't know what you're supposed to be doing.
It can be just show on the outside, but inside you're not feeling it at all.
Yeah, you can look good and still feel bad inside. And so I wasn't a depressed kid. I think I was like most kids. I was working very hard to stay comfortably numb. But suddenly something woke up inside me, and I realized that there can be answers to some of these very big questions. And so I've been doing this for a long time.
So would you say that you started to find answers to your questions, or that it started more from an emotional place where you started feeling differently about the questions themselves?
It would be both, but no, I felt different about the questions only because I started to see that there could be some answers. And so rather than running away from them, why not use them to climb to a higher level of life. And so a lot of people, I think, resonate with my teachings because I didn't do any research because I wanted to share these answers with anybody. I didn't do this because I was wondering, well, what are people asking about life and Judaism that I could answer? The questions that I answer are really the questions I myself have struggled with. There are many that I continue to struggle with, but I've made some serious progress with. And so I've written 8 books, but the truth is I wrote them for myself because it's been my own journey to find myself, my connection to God, my connection to the Jewish people, my connection and place in the world. Mm. And so I think people resonate with my journey because it's very much similar to theirs.
And so ultimately your own struggle ended up bringing out answers that have helped you over time and that can really help a lot of other people. I believe everyone in some way struggles with big questions in life that answers can be difficult to find. How would you say your outlook and understanding of dealing with these big life issues has changed over time? Do you feel that it's similar to the way it was when you first started finding the answers, or have these experiences in life developed your outlook?
Well, as you grow up, the answers have to grow up with you. And answers that might satisfy you when you're 17 years old, as you start growing up, might not be enough. Often they're really not enough. And so they've evolved. My understanding of what we mean when we say God has really evolved. And what we mean when we say Judaism or Torah has really evolved. So, but I think the first surprise when I was 17 is a positive orientation to God. Because I had a very negative orientation to God. Because he's the guy that allowed this, where was God when all these Jews were dying? So I didn't really have an understanding of a compassionate, forgiving God that was on my side.
And how did that change over time? Because it's understandable, again, starting out as a kid, as you're saying, with your mom, having gone through the Holocaust, hearing her scream, that was your understanding. God did this. How did you go from that to having this positive understanding of God?
Well, it's really been a journey, a long journey. I mean, my family, we weren't so into the ritual of Judaism. It didn't seem very ritual. But we did religiously go to synagogue 3 times a year, 2 days for Rosh Hashanah and 1 day for Yom Kippur. And I remember one Yom Kippur where the rabbi said that because it's Yom Kippur, the ark will be open for a very long time. And in general, we stand when the ark is open. But because it'll be open for a very long time, you could sit down. And I thought to myself, well, wait, I show up here 3 times a year. I mean, if all I need to do to get God off my back is to stand, I could do that. How long could this thing be open? Well, so the rabbi said to the congregation, please rise as we open the ark. They opened the ark. Everybody stood up and immediately sat down. Hundreds of people. And I looked around and I said, oh my gosh, you're all going to hell. I mean, like, you already sat down, And there I was standing in the middle of the sanctuary. And I said, I'm not going to sit down. Well, it went on, and the cantor did the, and I realized, wow, that was just one word, and that was about 5 minutes. And my feet started to hurt, my back started to ache, and I decided I gotta sit down. I mean, I can't take this anymore. But then I realized, but I know how God works. I sit down, they'll close the ark, I'll go to hell. He's waiting for me to sit down. And so I stood and I stood and I stood until finally they closed that ark, and I fell to my chair, and I felt so good because I was in so much pain. And that must make God happy because he likes when we suffer. That was how it distorted my understanding of God was, that it's all about guilt and pain.
Your initial connection to God was really based on fear.
Oh, yeah. A lot of fear.
It's not an easy thing to break. Now you say your connection to God is very much based on love. A lot of your books are based on that concept. How did you go from fear to love?
Long long journey, but it's about getting a more mature understanding of what do you mean by God in the first place. I mean, there was a period of time that I decided to be an atheist, and I stopped believing in God. I just continued to fear him. So I feared the God I didn't believe in. Very deep inside us. It's been a real long journey of going into the classical texts of Torah, especially the texts rooted in Kabbalah and Chassidut, that really address in a much deeper way. And I say to people, there's a version of Judaism that is good when you're a child and is right for a child. But as we grow older, somebody has to give you a version that is more appropriate to your level of intellectual sophistication and spiritual experience.
Would you say a lot of people are still walking from the people that you meet? You're a rabbi, you talk to people a lot, people come to you with questions. Does it seem to you that there are a lot of adults that still have the child's version of God?
Oh, yeah. A lot of people are still suffering. I always share a little story. I had a stage in my career where I was working with actors and actresses in Hollywood, and one of the actors I became very connected to and started sharing Judaism with was an actor by the name of Kirk Douglas. And the first time I met with Kirk Douglas, it was it's a longer story, but he was coming to my home for Shabbat meal. I'm not going to explain how that happened, but he and I were standing on the rooftop of my organization's building, Israelite Oraita. And we were standing there, and there hasn't been much conversation between us yet. And he turns to me and he starts singing, L'chu naranana laHashem nariya l'tzur yishenu. And I was shocked. How did he know the beginning of the prayer that receives Shabbat? And I looked at him in surprise. He says, Rabbi, I know my lines. I'm an actor. I grew up in an Orthodox home. But, Judaism is all form, no content. So I said, oh, that's interesting. Now let me ask you a question. Imagine if you were to base your diet today on your understanding of food as a child. What would you be eating? He said, I'll be eating junk. I said, yeah. I said, imagine if you were to base your budget today on your understanding of money as a child. How would you be spending your money? Said, I'd be squandering it on junk.
What a story. I'm sure our listeners want to continue to hear what Kirk Douglas answered to some of your very powerful questions. Stay tuned. After these messages, we'll return stories, more of Rabbi David Aaron's story, more of his conversation he had with Kirk Douglas, and his journey towards finding answers to big questions.
Hi, I'm Tamar Yona. I want to personally welcome you at the launch of Israel News Talk Radio. We want to be your station, so if you have any feedback you'd like to share, or you have some great ideas you'd like to see implemented, write us and let us know. We can't promise to reply to every email, but we do read your letters. Let us know what you think. Write us at info@israelnewstalkradio.com. That's info@israelnewstalkradio.com. We're your station for news from the Med Sea to the Dead Sea. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
We're back with Rabbi David Aaron and Soul Talk. Rabbi Aaron was just sharing with us an encounter he had with Kirk Douglas, the actor. They had a very meaningful conversation about God, updating our image and relationship with God. Rabbi Aaron, if you don't mind sharing with us, continuing the story you started before the break.
Sure. Well, so Kirk Douglas told me that Judaism was all form and no content. I asked him, imagine if you were to base your diet today on your understanding of food as a child, what would you be eating today? He said junk. If you based your budget today on your understanding of money as a child, what would you be spending it on? I said junk. I said, so imagine if you were to base your Jewish identity and understanding of God as you understood as a child. What would it be? He said, okay, checkmate, Rabbi. Are you telling me to grow up? Now, when I met him, he was, I think, 79 years old. I said, I'm not telling you to grow up. I'm saying that as we all grow up, words that were part of our vocabulary as children have to grow up with us. The meaning, the word's the same word, but the meaning behind the word, when I was a child, I knew the word love, but the meaning that was associated with that word was so different than what it means to me today. And yes, a lot of people haven't really taken the time to redefine the words that they use in their daily life.
So what you're saying about your own journey and the journey you had to go through of basically updating your concepts, maturing the concepts that you had about God and about life, is really can be revolutionary for people's personal lives, because we have to all ask ourselves this question: is the concept I have about God, about certain foundational concepts of living my life, happiness, what I want in life, have I updated, have I matured, or am I still possibly stuck in the same place I was when I was 10 years old?
Yeah, and what's really difficult about being stuck is when you don't even know you're stuck. If you know you're stuck and you're in pain over it and you try to do something, that's already the beginning of getting unstuck. But I mean a lot of people that don't even know that they're stuck. That's really stuck.
So it's hard to make changes if you don't even realize that something really needs to change.
Yeah, especially this generation worries me more than ever because, as I mentioned earlier on, as a child, I did struggle. I tried to laugh and rock a lot, but that voice would sometimes break through the noise I was creating, and I was forced to contemplate. I didn't have a cell phone that would be constant distraction anytime I want. So I think people don't understand that, when there's pain inside, that's a healthy voice of the soul saying, hey, let's struggle here and let's make some changes here. Imagine your car and you've got that little light that tells you something's wrong with the oil and it's flashing and you're like, this is annoying. I'm going to disassemble that. That's a big mistake. So what's happening is the indicators for change are being disconnected for a lot of people. And then something can be building up, rotting inside, and suddenly they want a divorce, and they don't know why it was sudden. It wasn't sudden. It was just building up inside, but you were not listening to the indications.
So what you're saying is it's really important for us to be in touch with our own emotional discontent when something's not feeling right. Instead of trying to take emotional Tylenol, we should look at it as a warning sign that I have to look at what's going on, look deeper into where is this coming from, and that will be a more long-lasting solution than sometimes the short-term fixes that as a generation we try to run to.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have confused happiness, real happiness, with the comfortably numb state of mind. And I think a lot of society is a big painkiller. And we're taking these tranquilizers, music, theater, video games. There's no lack of opportunities to shut down and block out the soul crying, the soul yearning, the soul asking. People are afraid of the restlessness. I was one of those people. But that restlessness is the key to growth, creativity, depth of character, and really touching what's real in a profound way.
So instead of running away from restlessness, in a way we have to sort of embrace it and become stronger to live with it, to then develop it into something good. Now, I'm sure a lot of people who are listening can probably identify with the feelings you're talking about of trying to run away, finding distractions, whether for themselves or also, you're saying, raising children in this generation where there's so many distractions, make it very difficult to really deal with real issues. Do you, especially since you are a rabbi dealing with youth right after high school, what suggestions do you have to help people within themselves and within people around them, their children, to start to learn how to Not run away, but embrace.
Well, it's the art of true relationship. Facebook realized something very serious, which is people are yearning connection. That's something that people want. They want connection. And therefore, Facebook takes off because here I've got all these friends and I've got all these likes. But is it real connection? It's virtual connection. A friend of mine, his wife had so many friends and so much interaction. And unfortunately she got sick and wasn't online, and she got almost nobody writing, "Hey, what happened to you? Where are you?" And you start to think about, well, who really are your friends? What really is your connection? I think youth today are craving connection, and yet they've been duped into a shallow virtual connection. And I think as parents, we have to take time to really be present for our children and allow them to feel what it means to be present for us, but not just texting.
That's very powerful and very important, especially practical advice for parents. And again, part of what this show, Soul Talk, is going to be about is, instead of feeling like you have to run away from questions that bother you, that you don't feel like you have answers to, we're going to right here be dealing with some of those fundamental, deep questions that may have been sitting with you for a long time, that maybe need an update as far as maturity and understanding. That's going to happen right here on Soul Talk with Rabbi David Aaron. Rabbi Aaron, before we end, can you share anything else with us that you think might be helpful for our listeners to understand as far as your own journey and clarity and understanding, where it comes from, how it's developed?
Yeah. It really is all about the quality of your questions. The great quest always starts with a great question. And the quality of our lives is determined by the kind of questions that we ask or actually don't ask. And I think the more we embrace questions and seek out questions, a question is like a vessel, a receptacle. It's raining blessings, but I don't have a cup to catch it with. And so the questions are really, in many ways, it's really the biggest part of the answer, is to ask questions and ask the right questions that can set me in the right direction to greater self-awareness and actualization and connection with people. And so I asked people. I just had a meeting with one of my students, and he's not so happy, and he's really struggling and trying to have more motivation, in his learning. I asked him, did you ever sit down and write down the questions you'd like to get answered this year? He said, actually never even dawned on me. I mean, that's like number one of the number one to-do list. Is what are your questions? What questions, if you could get answered, would enhance your life, would enable you to be more successful, to be more happy, more creative, more connected? It's really so much about the questions, and yet a lot of people are spending a lot of time running away from the questions.
So if a person could try to put their discontent or whatever it is that's bothering them or unsatisfying into a form of a question, it clarifies it for them, it brings it out more, and it really puts you more in a direction of starting to find answers. And that's a very important point, because a lot of time, I think, when we start to have questions, we get nervous. That's what we run away from. And what you're saying here is that instead of running away from the question, it's important to embrace the question. That's the starting point towards really getting a sense of clarity, meaning, purpose, and a greater understanding.
Yeah, a good question is worth gold. I mean, one of the sad things I'm seeing with a number of the students that I'm meeting that have gone through many years of a Torah education is they weren't encouraged to ask questions. And so they kind of gave up and even forgot that you could ask questions. And, my philosophy is no question is out of bounds. The way a person asks a question, that could sometimes be out of bound if it's presented in a disrespectful way, and it's not really a question at all, but really a comment and a critique. But a genuine question is worth gold, and we should be encouraging our children to ask questions, and also let them know that right now we might not get the answer. It could take years to get the answer. But that doesn't mean the question isn't worthwhile, and that the question has been driving me to find that answer, which could take years.
And so ultimately, the question is the beginning towards learning. It's the beginning towards maturing. It's the beginning towards moving yourself on in life to a new place with new understanding and new clarity. I hope that you'll all join us here next week as we join Rabbi David Aaron once again for Soul Talk, where we will be sharing answers to questions that you may have. And once again, we would like to invite you to start pondering questions that Rabbi David Aaron can address for the greater good of yourself and the greater good of all of us.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.